Chapter 381, Intense Killing Intent. It felt truly awkward to be left in a state with nothing to do. Gu Xiaozheng and her troops stood rooted to the ground for a moment before immediately heading in a different direction. Even if she was unable to complete her duty to stall the enemy, the least she could do was help the others. Instead, at this time, there was yet another bunch of players who had nothing to do, as they were momentarily at a loss as to what measures they should be taking. Back in the river valley, the two squads had each circled halfway in either direction, allowing them to meet and link back up together. They could have accidentally fought with one another had it not been for the fact that they could tell the other party was not a group of 7 men. Now that both squads were now facing one another again, they were surprised that they had not caught sight of Mage and his team, despite having just finished completing their circuit of the area. That mercenary leader was very anxious at this time, because he had already received the message that one of the parties of players from Yunjuan City had already been inspected and their target was reduced by 1. This was considered good news for anyone in the coalition, but it was actually bad news for him. He needed time on his end as well. This mercenary leader once more suspiciously regarded Southern Lone Blade, despite having thought the latter's analysis to be reasonable. Why aren't they here? Southern Lone Blade could not make sense of it either. Whether the enemy was looking to traverse along this path that cut through both branches of the fork, or if they were heading back to take the right branch, they would still have to get through one group of players. As things stood, there could only be a single explanation: the enemy had not taken this route at all. Where else could they be? Southern Lone Blade muttered. "I'm curious as well," that mercenary leader said in an icy tone. His attitude towards Southern Lone Blade ever since they had met had been quite the extraordinary experience, a roller coaster ride of emotions with troughs and crests. "Oh, crap." Southern Lone Blade looked to have suddenly thought of something, his hand slapping his forehead. "What?" The leader's heart tightened in that moment. Southern Lone Blade quickly drew out that reverse letter A on the ground again, pointing towards the left tail end of the A. "Both of our groups, one went through the horizontal connecting path while the other took the vertical path over. But we missed that dead end. At this rate, considering the time we took to meet each other like this, they could have taken that connecting path towards the right river path and continued on towards the city." The mercenary leader quickly came to the same conclusion as well, realizing the situation they were in as he immediately recalled his men. "God damn it, hurry and give chase." Southern Lone Blade's heart was racing even faster at this point. He had originally thought he was not in any particular rush. All he needed to do was to casually keep an eye on the target, and wait for the right moment to strike. If this time it failed, there would be another opportunity next time. Southern Lone Blade was a very patient man, after all. But the current situation he was in made it seem as if every move he had made thus far had been clearly in the grasp of the enemy. His squad might very well have been exposed to those men already, which meant that he had to make his move soon. The longer he took to do the deed, the more likely the enemy would be prepared for him. "Hurry, hurry, hurry." The mercenary was busy rushing the throng of men he had brought along. However, no matter how fast everybody was, they would still have to match the movement speed of the slowest individual. They had no issues blocking people at such a speed, but giving chase made things difficult. Southern Lone Blade quickly told him, "We won't be able to catch up to them like this. It's best to select a few players with fast movement speed to engage the enemy first, as the rest of us hurry behind." Given how familiar the mercenary leader was with regards to the journey and terrain of the land, how could he not know that they could only maintain a certain distance away from their target with the pace they were at, which would never allow them to catch up to them? Thus, he made the decision on the spot, quickly picking out thieves and archers for this task. Unfortunately, he was a warrior himself, so there was no way he could personally lead this team. All he could do was repeatedly remind them, "Be quick. It's best if you can intercept them by the river mouth. We'll be right behind catching up. Good luck." These archers and thieves had never fought Mage and his mercenaries before, so they had no idea just how formidable they were. These speedsters believed that they would be able to suppress the enemy by themselves, so they left with boundlessly confidence. But the mercenary leader was well aware of the level of skill they would be facing, and he was certain that just those men alone would not be enough to make the enemy even break a sweat if they were to clash in earnest. However, because they were all speedsters, he felt they should be able to stall for time, so he made sure to keep reminding them to take care and take more care, only missing out the part, "It's fine if you guys die." The key here is to delay those men for us. While the men within the river valley were making a commotion over this matter, the battle outside the valley had a rapid change in development. With the sudden appearance of the Eternal War mercenary group, as well as the inclusion of the other party of players that had merged with another party when they were left to their own devices, the players from Yeonju-on City found it exponentially more difficult to hold on like before. This was especially true when going against the men from Eternal War, who were not killing the men they had downed, yet all it took was an exchange of a few blows before they faced a seismic toss. Yeonju-on City players were being tossed all around as a result. While their combat strength remained the same, the problem was that the tightly packed formation they had originally adopted had long been disrupted. Thus, finding out if Todd was hidden within their party could be done at a quick glance. Even though those members of the mercenary group coalition were vexed that Eternal War had suddenly turned up, they realized that their ability to hand-check the enemy had proven to be valuable. They were essentially able to benefit greatly from it, since the moment they saw Todd was not around, they could rush to the aid of another party instead. With only 3 remaining parties left, they were able to easily take down the players of Yeonju-on City with 2 groups ganging up on them. Because they could not see a trace of Todd, they were certain that the last party would be where he was hiding via the process of elimination. This last party left standing happened to have Black Forefinger in command. He was really crafty, intentionally pulling the fight to the far side of the map as they battled, so they avoided meeting Eternal War from the start, or from bumping into the aid of the other parties who were left with nothing to do. But at this moment, with all the battles of the other 3 parties at an end, everybody that had participated in the battles all across the map, including the players from Yeonju-on City, converged on their location and surrounded them. Naturally, it was important to be fully devoted to the role if they were to act the part. Now that everyone had determined that they were the ones hiding Todd in their party, it only made sense for them to fight as if their lives depended on it. Originally, the movement speeds of all the parties involved in this battlefield would be incomparable to that of Eternal War, as a whole. But now that victory was right in their sights, nobody cared for the fact it was a group PvP, as the job classes with the fastest movement speed raced against time to run to their aid. In that instant, the entire map looked as if it was a large-scale wargaming simulation, each job class no longer caring to match their movement speeds with one another. Those who could run faster were recklessly leading the charge, while those who were slower huffed as they trailed behind. Black Forefinger sure had it tough. He had specifically led his party to the furthest reaches of the map precisely to avoid a scenario where the enemies that were done with their fighting would rush over to lend aid. While that had proven to be effective, it had actually made his party to become the last group standing. It was precisely because he was the last party remaining that instantly caused them to become public enemy number 1. Everyone came pouncing towards them, and their fighting spirit at this moment had reached the apex, as if they had no more regrets once they finished this last fight, leaving nothing in their tank for this final push. Even those that had been fighting with them all this while instantly changed their style of fighting. These men originally wanted to find Todd without suffering too much of a loss in the process of doing it, so they fought a little reservedly. But now that it was guaranteed that Todd would be found within, they abruptly embraced the scorched earth policy, endlessly bombarding, blasting and slashing with reckless abandon. However, everyone was ultimately balanced in terms of their power. This death or glory offensive swiftly eliminated players from both sides. Black Forefinger watched the enemy count steadily drop like flies, his own men matching it equally, while the players that were running their way across the hills and dunes on the map were increasing as well. These players hailed from both Lori City as well as Yeonju-on City, both parties rushing over to lend a hand to their respective comrades, engaging in skirmishes with one another along the way. And because the difference in movement speed had increased the distance, the entire battle suddenly looked very three-dimensional and layered. Leading the charge was a phalanx of dagger-wielding thieves, who had the highest movement speed out of all the job classes in Parallel World after they activated their fleet foot. However, fleet foot only lasted for a limited duration, and once that was over, their movement speed would lose to that of the archers, allowing the formations of archers to stride past them, maintaining their distance from afar, executing highly difficult shots as they advanced. Because there were so many people fighting, even if a single arrow released did not hit their intended target, it might still be able to score a hit or knock over another person instead. While it was difficult to say if this would be an enemy or ally taking the hit, no one really put much thought towards it. What followed after them was the exchange of spells from the crowd of mages right behind. Out of all the skirmishes occurring between the job classes, this was the most exciting to watch. Fireballs floating from within the mass of players like a guiding light, while the peal of thunder could be heard periodically. Seeing a thunderbolt strike squarely onto people's heads, as the cold Arctic whirlwind spun forth all over the battlefield, twisting and turning. There were even large bursts of raging flames in certain areas, where some of the mages were apparently not satisfied and had decidedly stood still to toss out their 2 AO spells imposingly. The knights and warriors running behind were rather similar in their approach. These players did not have any brilliant visual effects in their arsenal of skills, but the sound of clashing blades was deafening, and they were users of heavy weaponry. Although the weapons used by the knights were slightly inferior in comparison, it was nevertheless far louder than the sounds made by the daggers from the thieves. And finally, the pack of priests took up the rear. These men had no inherent combat power whatsoever, but using their heel on the enemy was a good method to show their disgust to the other. However, since they were in the middle of a huge battle, everyone was hoping to conserve their mana to use when it was truly needed, so this lot of priests was like a thunderstorm without rain. If anyone were to close their eyes, they would surely think the fight here was the fiercest, given how loudly these players were cussing at each other. But the reality was that aside from their war of words, they did not do anything at all. The only job class left were the fighters, and because fighters were still not particularly favored by most experts, they were unable to form a phalanx of their own and had to randomly mix into the different job classes instead. Both sides continued to harass each other as they ran on, rendering the entire map exceptionally chaotic. Plenty of players who were minding their own business grinding were dumbfounded at this sight. PvP fights occurred every day, but it was usually with 2 clearly defined sides clashing head-on until the victor was decided. A good example would be the 4 separate battles that had happened just now. But at this moment, it was like ants were instantly swarming all over the map, and even fighting towards the same direction all at once. It was truly a rare sight. The one who benefited the most from this ended up being the members of Eternal War. These guys were experts beyond experts. No one dared to be overconfident and entangle with them, especially since most of them were fighters, so they did not really have any part in this job class vs. job class war. Thus, with no one obstructing them in their decent movement speed, these fighters could simply sprint all the way through to be the first ones to arrive. The combatants over by Black Forefingers had already been fighting until they were seeing red. The members of Eternal War did not bother to distinguish between either party as they dashed into the midst of combat at the command of Eternal Dominion, throwing a few punches and kicks at everybody, be they from Lori City or Yeonju-on City, pummeling them soundly to the ground. In the end, they still did not manage to catch a glimpse of Todd. Chapter 382, clearly trying to steal the kill. Eternal Dominion watched the players from either side of the battle fighting with each other behind him. As a player belonging to Lori City, he felt extremely dispirited for all his fellow mercenaries. He had already heard from his comrades that both sides had been fighting it out with one another for the longest time. Apparently Todd was supposed to be in one of these 4 parties, yet in the end, after all the fighting, Todd was nowhere to be found. It was like they had planned out a monumentally grand scheme to steal the sun from the sky, yet all they stole was a matchbox, and it even turned out to be goddamn empty. How could anyone bear this level of frustration? The coalition of Lori City players were feeling precisely this particular emotion right now. Every mercenary channel quickly spread the news the moment they discovered Todd was not with this final party. Black Forefinger had also informed all his fellow mercenaries from Yeonju-on City who were participating in this subterfuge the moment he was defeated. The passionate fight between both sides coincidentally stopped at the same time as well, with members from both sides staring at one another, suddenly realizing how pointless this was. Indeed, there was nothing more pointless and disheartening than finding out that what they had accomplished had been entirely meaningless. The players from Lori City instantly felt this fight was entirely fruitless once they found out Todd was not here. On the other hand, The players from Yunjuan City felt as if all the hard work they had been doing all this while was meaningless as well, since they had yet to receive the message about Todd's safe delivery to Lori City, yet their plan to stall for time had already been exposed by the enemy. It should not have ended so quickly. The Yunjuan City players were all feeling regretful since the reason for this had been due to the sudden inclusion of Eternal War mercenary group. Oh heavens! Where in the world did these bunch of bastards come from? Just having one or two experts of their caliber was already unreasonable enough, but to actually have an entire mercenary group of them, where's the justice in that? All the players thought with great indignation. If Todd's nowhere to be found within these four parties, then where exactly is he hiding right now? Eternal Dominion did not bother lamenting too much as he calmly continued to focus on their mission goal. Well, none of his underlings could answer him. Anyone know? Eternal Dominion called out, heavily hinting his willingness to reward anyone who could give him a straight answer. No one answered. This is so strange. When they left that river valley, they clearly had only split up into 4 parties, not 5. Someone wondered aloud. River Valley? Eternal Dominion started. So if he's not here, wouldn't that mean he's still in the valley? Everyone was stunned. The more attentive players among them had instantly glanced over to the faces of those Yunjuan City players to look for signs from their expressions, and they indeed noticed a row of regretful expressions the moment Eternal Dominion said that. Did anyone from your group split off into the valley and take a look? Eternal Dominion asked those mercenaries from Lori City. Nope. Those who replied looked ashamed, as they were embarrassed that they had actually missed such a possibility. In truth, it was not that they failed to review this option, but rather the person who did consider this possibility became selfish. At this point of time, that selfish man had to share this piece of information as well. After he heard that the 4 parties outside the river valley had been taken care of and had yet to find any trace of Todd, he immediately blurted out as if he had suddenly made the realization, I got it, he must be hiding in that valley, hoping to enter the city via the valley. He had no choice but to say it now. He believed that no matter how stupid his fellow mercenaries in this coalition were, they would easily make the same deduction once they believed Todd was still in the valley. If the lot of them were to rush over to the valley to check, then his scheme to intercept and kill Todd by himself would be exposed, he would have likely dyed the river red as a result. Thus, he decided to make the first move instead, messaging everyone to report his inference and quickly added, I'm near here. I'll lead my men into the valley. Everyone, hurry. He would be the only fool here if he still had designs to take this mission for himself. Besides, he could not take it for himself even if he wanted to. This was due to the fact that even now, he had yet to even caught a glimpse of YMH and his men. The team of archers that he had sent in advance had been running all this while and were about to reach the very walls that surrounded Lori City, but they had yet to find any trace of them. Meanwhile, they had came up with nothing as they made their way through the connecting path between the branches of the valley. Could it be that just as they ran past here, they had already made their way through before we were even here, so we had them sandwiched between us? That mercenary leader muttered. Southern Lone Blade furrowed his brow, as he had already felt this was a little strange. Brother Southern Blade, what are your thoughts on this? It just so happened that this mercenary leader had even asked for his opinion by name. He could tell that the man had been thinking over this for quite some time, and was at a loss. Besides, now that he was no longer able to have this gate to himself, his will to fight had also dropped hugely. Let's first get your men from outside to properly watch this valley. They are sure to discover them if they do appear, Southern Lone Blade replied. Relax. I've already got my men situated around for this. They confirmed they saw no one making their way up, that mercenary leader said. Then they must still be in the valley. They must be. Could it really have been coincidence, time and time again that led to a strange combination of circumstances that caused us to never cross paths? Southern Lone Blade wondered. Some of you, continue on forward and meet up with those that headed back. If you meet them, stall for time. The rest of the guys will reach you soon enough, the mercenary ordered, his words unable to hide how downcast he felt about this situation. Brother Southern Blade, let us walk through here once more. He pointed towards the passage that connected horizontally. Perhaps they are coming this way. Southern Lone Blade was a little hesitant to take up this offer. He was worried the men would not be headed in this direction. Even though he had an accord with this mercenary leader to leave that video mage to him, it was evident that the words of this man might not hold any weight in this current situation, now that reinforcements were coming their way. Just in case they were headed the wrong way and YMH and his men were going the other direction, he was worried that the video mage would have already been slain by the time he rushed over, and the heap of equipment that person would drop would naturally land in their hands as well. But if he thought of this in another sense, he could not be in two places at once himself, so there was no way for him to head in two different directions at once, anyway. Hence, he finally decided to remain with this mercenary leader and his men after careful consideration. That mercenary leader was no longer in high spirits like before, appearing sullen as he sighed from time to time, looking entirely listless. Nowhere to be found. Just as Southern Lone Blade and everybody finished traversing through the gully, they could already hear the sound of footsteps pounding upon dirt from outside the valley, as the reinforcements arrive en masse at their location. The entire trip over had been very tense since the Yunjuan City players had also came along looking to support YMH, thus both parties maintained their battle formations as they rushed over as fast as they could. In such a situation, it was actually the Eternal War mercenary group that arrived first. Southern Lone Blade and the others had just stepped out from the interconnecting passage when they saw a continuous stream of players show up, fearlessly leaping down the valley and landing neatly right before them. The person taking the lead slowly got up, his hand lightly tapped his temple, counting the number of players present before laughing. "You got here really quick, Pholus." Southern Lone Blade had no idea who this newcomer was, but turning his head over to look, he saw the ugly look on the mercenary leader, who was staring at this man without saying a word. More and more players gathered behind him. It was clear there were a great number of fighters among them, which clued in Southern Lone Blade to realize who these people were, the Eternal War mercenary group. That meant this person that had come forward must be the man who was also one of the 5 unyielding experts, Eternal Dominion. Southern Lone Blade had only heard of this man previously, and this was the first time he had actually seen this man in person, so he could not help but glance at him a few more times. Eternal Dominion was already greeting this mercenary leader with a broad smile, ignoring that stink face he was showing. "Have you found Todd yet?" Eternal Dominion asked. "What are you doing here?" The mercenary leader whom Eternal Dominion had called Pholus evaded his question. "Same as you, of course, we're doing the mission," Eternal Dominion answered cheerfully. The mercenary leader Pholus had a clear look of distaste. This was not the first time Eternal War had tried to snatch a mercenary mission from under their noses, and by the look he was showing, he had never once been their match. At this time, a message from the right side of the valley came through. Both teams had linked up with one another, but they had yet to locate their target. "Nowhere as well?" Pholus was absolutely taken aback by this, gazing over at Southern Lone Blade, befuddled. "What's the problem?" Eternal Dominion came forward and butted in. "It's none of your business," Pholus narrowed his eyes as he whispered to Southern Lone Blade, "Nothing here either." Before Southern Lone Blade could say a word, Eternal Dominion had already smiled at him and said, "I don't think I recognize this bro here." "I'm from Linshui City, Southern Lone Blade." Southern Lone Blade calmly introduced himself. "Ah." Eternal Dominion looked extremely astonished when he learned this, gazing over at Pholus. "You guys even hired external help?" "You didn't do that just directed at me, did you?" "Hee, that's not the case. I'm here on personal business, I only just encountered them along the way." Southern Lone Blade evenly explained the matter to Eternal Dominion for Pholus. "Oh." Eternal Dominion hummed, turning back towards Pholus, "So you were just saying, what did you discover?" "They've already brought Todd out of the valley. Quick, go chase after them." Pholus was not in the mood. "That's childish." Eternal Dominion pointed his finger at Pholus and laughed. "You wanna trick me just like that? That's too immature. Seeing you guys step out from there, that probably meant you came from the right branch of the valley. In turn, this mean they are not there, nor anywhere in the connecting passage, so should I take a left here, or right?" Eternal Dominion lifted both his hands respectively as he asked. His left was pointing towards the dead end, while his right led him back to the fork. "Logically speaking, YMH and his comrades should definitely not be in that dead end, but Southern Lone Blade and the rest had already circled the valley an entire round by now, and that dead end was the only place they had not actually been to. There was a strong possibility that was where they were right now. Everybody heard as Pholus gritted his teeth and said, "Left and right, let's each pick one." "Oh, then where are you guys going?" Eternal Dominion let the other make the first choice. Pholus chose the path leading towards the dead end at Southern Lone Blade's suggestion. "Good, very good. We'll take that way too." Eternal Dominion called out and led his comrades forward. "You!" Pholus was so mad he could barely make out the words, finally yelling, "You're clearly trying to KS us." "That right. Surely you already knew that?" "What? Is this your first day meeting me?" "You're so ridiculous." Eternal Dominion turned his head to say, as he and his pack of associates swaggered in the direction of the dead end. Chapter 383, Sneaking Through a Shortcut. One. Let's get going as well. Southern Lone Blade said. In truth, he did not care if the Eternal War mercenary group or the coalition of mercenaries ended up as the victor for this limitless competitive mission. His target this time round was the Video Mage, so it was a win for him as long as the Video Mage's equipment dropped. He was more than happy to partner up with Eternal War, the mercenary group that was rumored to be capable of fighting 1 against 10. Naturally, the mercenary leader Pholus thought otherwise. But no matter the case, it was inevitable for him to end up heading over to the final area he had yet to search. However, he made sure to instruct several of his men to head in the other direction for a look, even as he made a point to hurry the other members of the coalition along. Eternal War is here. The way he said that made it sound as if he had seen a wolf. As the message from all the other players who were searching the other routes came in, each reporting back that they had not seen a trace of anyone, the possibility of young Master Han and his lot being in that dead end increased, causing Southern Lone Blade's suspicions to weigh heavier on his mind. It was evident that they should be hurrying to escort their prisoner to the city, so why would they be hiding out in that dead end all this while? Finally, they reached the end of the valley. The members of Eternal War had all gathered together, even going so far as to leave a spot for Southern Lone Blade and Pholus with their men. But the scene before them had actually left them beyond speechless. The team they had been searching all this while was actually seated deep in this valley cut off, leisurely having a barbecue. Bottles of liquor and fish bones littered the ground, and Southern Lone Blade could instantly tell that these fish were the same found in Linshui City. "No way, man. Wounds. Your skill just ain't comparable to those guys by Linshui Harbor," young Master Han criticized War Without Wounds. War Without Wounds was holding on a stick of fish as he carefully barbecued it over the fire, retorting, "Those guys make a living off the craft, how could you be comparing me to them? But the issue right now is that you wish to use this craft to court the ladies. With the level of skill you demonstrated, I can't tell if you're trying to court the ladies or court death," young Master Han said. "Bullshit." War Without Wounds was agitated hearing this. "Then you guys should stop eating." This lot was truly too inhumane, to actually grab and eat the fish he was cooking without any restraint, even as they criticized his skill. This merry scene really annoyed Pholus greatly, who had expended so many resources in their search for these clowns. But it was actually Southern Lone Blade who felt even more vexed by what he saw. Each and every one of the members of this team could be seen at a glance, yet the face of that man he had traveled great distances to hunt was nowhere to be found. Big South, that mage. Flame-cinched clothes pointed at drifting. He did not know how Goofy looked, but he felt that the robe this mage had on was far too different from the legendary Video Mage. "That's not him." Southern Lone Blade shook his head even as he considered retreating back into the crowd, but he had regretfully realized that Brother Assist's eyes had long since caught sight of him. Even Sword Demon was staring right at him. As for the mercenary leader Pholus, he was now pointing towards one of those 7 men, even as he stuttered, you for the longest time, never finishing the words he had stuck in his mouth. "Me? What about me?" The man Pholus had been staring at was the disheveled-looking Todd. But at the moment, Todd was actually holding a fish in his hand as he raised a bottle of liquor to his lips with his other hand, having a merry time eating and drinking with everyone that looked nothing like the lifeless NPC he was before. "Just who the heck are you?" Pholus fumed. "Left hand of love, that man jovially replied. That was not a name many were unfamiliar with. Anyone who knew about drifting knew about his two other partners, Left Hand of Love and Right Hand of Cool. Their names were truly too outstanding and memorable, but aside from the three men themselves, no one out there could really tell who was the fighter or the archer. Your Left Hand of Love. Pholus was astonished. Doesn't that mean you're drifting? He turned to look at the mage in that group. The damage this mage had demonstrated during their clash before had truly been frightening to behold. Drifting chuckled without saying a word. Where's Right Hand of Cool? Pholus' gaze turned towards the archer among them. Royal God Call. Fuck, what are you looking at me for? Royal God Call instantly became enraged. Drifting was nothing more than a speck of dust in his eyes. How could he not be furious when this leader here had actually mistaken him as an underling of that trash bag? You're not? Pholus said in surprise. He is not. It was young Master Han's turn to speak. We were at max capacity, so we couldn't have him with us. Max capacity? Pholus was confused. But Southern Lone Blade instantly understood when he heard this. He was absolutely certain at this moment that these men had already discovered his plan to stalk them. He had thought himself to be the Oriole staking the cicada, when in fact he had been playing in the palm of young Master Han's hand all this while. Max capacity? That term was far too telling. The average party did not have a 7-man limit. The enemy had clearly arranged it so that they would form up 7 men, completely in line with the 7-man squad he had brought for this operation. In that sense, the mistake Pholus and his men made earlier was not an accident, but a situation that was intentionally created. Where in the world is Todd? Pholus was exasperated by this point. Obviously the enemy would not reveal this fact to him, yet he could not help but utter this question. As expected, young Master Han ignored his question entirely, raising several sticks of fish to the crowd and asked, "Would you like some barbecued fish?" This isn't a recommendation I could endorse, however, it's really terrible. Young Master Hans said that before addressing another in the crowd. Brother Southern Blade, members of Eternal War and that guy. Nameless mercenary leader. Ha 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 ha. Eternal Dominion suddenly burst into laughter. Interesting, but his name isn't nameless. He's called Pholus. All the experts stirred. They did not expect someone would actually dare to take such an arrogant-sounding name like that, as they each regarded this man who had died by their hands once with admiration. And you must be the legendary Eternal Dominion. Young Master Han's eyes darted towards the laughing fighter. Would you like some barbecued fish? Eternal Dominion shook his head to reject this offer. We're not here to eat fish, we're here to fight. We're looking for that man. Ed pointed towards Drifting. You're looking for me? Drifting was nonplussed. He had indeed traveled to several cities during his time in Parallel World, and had met many people along the way, but this was actually the first time he had come to Lori City, much less even met Ed. It made no sense he would get himself mixed up with this man. No wonder you're one of the 5 unyielding experts, to think you're actually someone who humbly hides his true talents. Today, we shall. Before Ed could continue his speech, one of the comrades beside him whispered a few words into his ear, even as young Master Han said, "This person isn't the mage you're looking to fight." Unsurprisingly, Eternal Dominion had mistaken Drifting for the mage his comrades were telling him about. He was visibly disappointed the moment he heard that this mage was not who he was searching for, before inquiring, "So, where is that guy?" Before young Master Han could even finish, a huge mob of heads sprouted from above the valley. The reinforcements from both sides had arrived, looking to assassinate and assist respectively, looking as boisterous as ever. "Where's Todd?" The mercenaries from Lori City were frantically shouting. "On your head!" The players from Yunjuan City immediately began their attack as the riverbank became a battlefield. There were many players who found themselves squeezed off the ledge like dumplings, but instead of landing in water, these players were instead covered in dirt when they fell down into the dried up riverbed. The players who were in the valley watching nationally could only treat this like a comedic scene, since they already knew that Todd was nowhere present. Everybody here had essentially busied themselves over nothing. Pholus quickly hurried to send this message out, while the players from Yunjuan City already knew what Todd looked like and had always thought he was attached to this small team. However, now they glanced down from that riverbank and caught no sight of Todd. Both sides were confused, and the fight slowly became more and more listless. "Where's Todd at? Where is he?" The shouts remained, but it was no longer just the mercenaries from Lori City demanding this, as those from Yeonju-on City shouted as well. Neither side could complete the mission without Todd. Todd should probably have reached the North Gate by now, I think. Can you guys still make it? Young Master Han revealed a victorious smile as he said this. OHHH. Yeonju-on City players cheered when they heard this. Even though they had been kept in the dark all this while, they were all willing to temporarily put aside being led on like this if they could achieve victory. Although everybody from Lori City present had wasted their effort for not all this while, each of them grit their teeth and bore with it. Quite a few of them still bore the tiniest sliver of hope when they heard their target had already reached the North Gate. After all, the prison was still quite a distance away from the North Gate. There was a chance they just might be able to make it. Quick, to the North Gate! Someone cried out. Those players with high movement speed swiftly set off, in hopes of making one final push for the prize. Of course, the players from Yeonju-on City would not idly stand by and let that happen, quickly attempting to intercept and stop them from doing so as both armies began to chaotically engage once more. And in the valley, young Master Han continued to urge War Without Wounds to continue cooking those fish of his conscientiously. Why did you tell them where Todd was? War Without Wounds asked in the mercenary channel, even as he continued to barbecue the fishes. It's better to give them something to do. Young Master Han said, otherwise, wouldn't they just trouble us instead? Everyone understood precisely what he meant. There was no telling if those men would not just slay young Master Han and the squad on the spot to alleviate the anger they were feeling, had they found out there was no hope for them to continue their mission. Take the mercenary leader Pholus, for example. Having been led on for the longest time, the rage he must be feeling was burning. Now that he possessed numerical superiority, why would he not take this chance to carve them all up? But now that he had heard that Todd was at the North Gate, it came as no surprise that he immediately led his men to give chase. As for Eternal War, it only made sense for them to hurry after the mission target just so they are in position to KS the moment they could not locate Gufei to fight. Southern Lone Blade had already determined that Todd must be in some insignificantly small party that consisted of no more than 2 or 3 players. While the 4 parties were busy wargaming with the enemy, they must have broken off and pretended to be normal players and left for Lori City. The video mage was a top-tier expert. He was bound to be assigned the all-important task of escorting their target to the final destination. With that thought, Southern Lone Blade was about to leave as well when the members of Young Master's Elite unexpectedly got up and called out, South Blade bro, are you trying to leave? That's a little too ungentlemanly of you, don't you think? Who do you think this group of experts I've gathered before you are here for? Chapter 384, Trapped. The moment young Master Han said this, he tossed away the fish he had been feasting on and stoppered the bottle of liquor in hand. Standing up, he casually wiped his hands off and took out his weapon. The players from Lori City had already left to get credit for the mission in their hurry, and the Eternal War mercenary group was no exception. Those who were a little slow may have heard what young Master Han said, but it was apparent no one had bothered to remain behind to assist Southern Lone Blade. Southern Lone Blade naturally knew he was at a great disadvantage now that he was down to just 4 men, but the issue was that they were down to a thief, warrior, mage and priest. While the thief might find a chance to flee, the same could not be said for the other 3 job class, leaving them no choice but to fight their way out if they hoped to escape. Moreover, Southern Lone Blade spared not even a single thought trying to explain his way out of this quagmire. He knew his opponents this time were certain of what he had planned, which meant any attempts to hide his intentions were essentially futile. Even if he told them his true target was the video mage and unrelated to them in the least, there was truly no point in saying such stupid things. They were most likely all friends, so why would they idly sit by and watch him hunt that mage to loot that man's dropped equipment? They would truly be worthless friends, had they really stood by and done nothing. As such, despite Southern Lone Blade's squad of 7 having been reduced down to 4, he and his men resolutely stood directly in a straight line before their opponents and locked their gazes. Brother Assist and Southern Lone Blade were originally friends, but any words exchanged right now would only make things more awkward than it stood as both sides knowingly avoided communicating with one another. With weapons already drawn, this situation had devolved to the point where only their blades would be the ones doing the talking. Be careful. The first one to shout was actually Drifting. Living up to his name as the top mage of Parallel World, he quickly warned everybody the moment he discovered that the enemy mage had been silently mouthing a spell incantation. The others were combat veterans as well, so they were deeply aware of the method of attack mages demonstrated when they subvocalized their spells. It was comparable to the sneak attacks thieves or archers would attempt at the start of battle, and seeing that their opponents had no archers while the thief was standing there in all his glory without activating his stealth, it made perfect sense that it would be the mage who picked up this role this time. But no one has to move. Drifting extended out his hand to stop the others as he finished his sentence. Mages could not simply just move their lips, where they pointed with their fingers would nationally decide where the spell was going to be unleashed. The expert Drifting had noticed where the enemy mage was pointing the moment he discovered the spell being cast, almost instantaneously discerning just where the spell would be positioned. A glorious boom sounded, as a blazing tree of 1,000 infernos erupted a few steps before everyone. Flame-Singed Clothes sighed audibly and said, "No doubt you deserve to be called the #1 mage." Now that they were in the valley like this, since their opponent had their backs against the wall, the only way for young Master Han and the experts to avoid any incoming spell would require them to step forward. Thus, he tossed his spell several steps ahead of them, so as to contain the enemy within his AO spell the moment they attempted to evade the attack. However, how would Drifting not be aware of such a commonly used tactic? He easily saw through it and informed the rest accordingly. That blazing tree of 1,000 infernos became the signal for the battle to start, as Royal God Call drew his bowstring and released a whistling snipe that raced through the air, directly targeting the enemy mage. Southern Lone Blade had already expected this archer to habitually target their mage in an attempt to insta-kill their weakest link. He had already positioned himself beside Flame-Singed Clothes in defense of this, and a satisfying metallic thunk could be heard when he caught that arrow with a lift of his shield. The damage from Royal God Call's snipe shocked Southern Lone Blade greatly, definitely worthy of his title as a top expert. Their priest immediately got to work and reactively bestowed a heal upon Southern Lone Blade. Meanwhile, young Master Han and the rest were rather taken aback themselves, though it was not due to their reaction or coordination they demonstrated. Just like Gufei had been initially, they were instead surprised that Southern Lone Blade had a sword in his right hand and a shield in the other. Brother Assist was the most sensitive to this strange setup, quickly using his appraisal for a look. But he had forgotten a crucial fact in his excitement: the appraisal skill would be useless when used against another player of a higher level than the user. Southern Lone Blade was one of the 5 unyielding experts, and he was now about to reach 42, Brother Assist was still working his way to level 41, so Southern Lone Blade was literally up another level on him. However, there were other players among Young Master's Elite that were level 41, namely Sword Demon and War Without Wounds. Brother Assist hurriedly asked Sword Demon to help him check, seeing that his proficiency with his appraisal skill was about the same as his. Sword Demon shook his head upon usage. "I'm only getting question marks from the shield on his left hand." "Quick dodge! A spell's coming!" Drifting shouted out once more. Flame-Singed Clothes had unleashed another spell the moment Southern Lone Blade came forward to defend him. And since the members of Young Master's Elite had the wall behind them and the still raging blazing tree of 1,000 infernos was right before them, the burning damage from the latter was much easier to bear than the new spell coming their way. The rest of the experts had made the same judgment call as well, stepping into the flames in unison even as a fiery light flashed in the sky above them and a descending wheel of flames came crashing down onto the ground they had been standing on moments ago. "Why didn't you cast that on top of the blazing tree of 1,000 infernos?" The thief Blackwater knit his brows after realizing Flame-Singed Clothes had changed his fighting style quite a bit for this battle. Drifting has too much experience when it comes to mages, that trick would not fool them in the least, so we are better off forcing them to step into the sea of flames in earnest, and take what little damage we can do. Flame-Singed Clothes answered, "Get out quick." This burning effect lasts for quite a long time. A blazing tree of 1,000 infernos originally had a 5-second sustained burning effect. These experts had reckoned the effect would soon finish after they stepped into the flames, so were in no hurry to move once more. Yet Drifting had immediately shouted this nugget of information to them. None of them cared to wait for an explanation as they made a break for it, with Royal God Call saying as he ran, the damage from the burn should reduce in time, and this should have been the final second of the supposed 5 seconds. Considering the actual amount of burn damage we're taking now, it's clear that it will last longer than we expected. Royal God Call was also an expert when it came to the Mage job class, so he was able to analyze this fact as well. But more importantly, given how Drifting had time and time again displayed his level of expertise with the Mage job class, Royal God Call could no longer stand it and instantly snatched this chance to explain the matter instead. Drifting had indeed had the same thought, so when he saw how Royal God Call rushed to grab this chance to explain the matter, he merely smiled and said nothing more. Flame-Singed Clothes had also heard all that was said and could not help but deeply sigh in awe of their enemy's experience with mages. The moment that Archer realized the underlying implication of the burning damage, he immediately thought of a name: Royal God Call. The enemy did have an expert with this name, and Southern Lone Blade had already mentioned him. Yet he never would have guessed that such a renowned mage expert would actually change his favorite job class to an archer in Parallel World. While Flame-Singed Clothes might have been preoccupied with his thoughts, his hands did not stand idly by, quickly jerking his magic staff upwards. He had already begun the incantation the moment he cast the descending wheel of flames, so the next spell he was about to release followed quickly, causing a row of flame to shoot up towards the sky and abruptly seal off the path those 7 men were running towards. This was the first time the veteran Drifting had even seen the spell Palatial Balefire in action. Just from the atmosphere it created hinted the damage it could do would be substantial. None of the 7, who had already taken some damage from the blazing tree of 1,000 infernos, dared to force their way through the intense flame before them. Yet the inferno they were in continued to rage, and they had no idea when it would end it. Letting their HP lower at this rate was no way to go either, so the 7 men could only helplessly retreat back to where they were originally standing. The thief Blackwater regretfully commented, "It would be great if glue was still around." At the moment, melee classes like him or Southern Lone Blade were unable to use this chance and attack the enemy while they were trapped. Man, this blazing tree of 1,000 infernos burning effect lasts really long. The 7 had already retreated back to where they started, yet the flames from the spell had yet to extinguish, while the conflagration from the Palatial Balefire continued to flare in the same intensity as before. It's very likely that man has equipment that increases the duration of the burn effect for fire spells. Drifting evaluated. As he said this, everybody saw the flames from the blazing tree of 1,000 infernos extinguish. Yet before they could step forward, Drifting alerted everyone once more as the sound of a fiery explosion filled their ears, and another blazing tree of 1,000 infernos surged anew. This guy, Royal God Call, was stunned. Even though he was not a mage, he nevertheless had quite the good grasp of the mage job class given his interest towards it in Parallel World. The cooldowns a mage had for the few AO spells they had in their arsenal were by no means short. Yet Flame-Singed Clothes was able to cast 2 blazing trees of 1,000 infernos consecutively, which meant the cooldown reduction he had for that spell was more than substantial. That man has carefully calibrated his blazing tree of 1,000 infernos so that the duration of that spell is around the same time it took for it to finish its cooldown, Drifting said. The others did not bother to think what sort of resultant effect such an achievement could mean, but mage experts like Royal God Call and Drifting could already come up with plenty of ideas to capitalize on it. I do not expect that twerp to actually have such an ace up his sleeve. It appears we have been properly sealed in this time around, Royal God Call said. And it would be as just what you've said, using his descending wheel of flame to force us to step into that sea of flames and take damage. Doing so repeatedly will slowly, but surely grind our HP way down till we have nothing left. Drifting concluded. And what you're competing against at this point will be mana consumption. Him or young master, whichever side first uses up their mana would then be the one in danger, Royal God Call commented. Since that man has to take note of his cooldown timers for his spells, there's a good possibility he will have also distributed quite a lot of spirit as a result. There's no way his mana could last. Also, young master isn't your average mage. His build focuses solely on the intelligence and spirit stats, making his mana pool even bigger than that of the average priest, Royal God Call said. Even though he was able to cast 2 AOs in succession like Young Master would have to cast 7 instances of heals to save our lives. The mana cost for either side of this confrontation will be huge, making it all the more difficult to tell, Drifting said. Yeah, it truly is difficult to determine the outcome, Royal God Call nodded. Young Master Han placidly gazed at the two. You two work really well together when you finish each other thoughts and sentences like this. Ah! Royal God Call realized what happened and covered his mouth with his hand with an extremely pained expression. Is my mouth going to rot as a result? No one bothered with him any longer. Young Master Han stared at Drifting. If pushed to the extreme, I can go at least 7 rounds of healing all 7 of us. Drifting understood what young Master Han meant when he told him this, instantly beginning his calculation of the enemy. I don't know how much mana it costs for that man to cast that spell of his that creates a wall of flames, but if it is anywhere around the same as a descending wheel of flames or blazing tree of 1,000 infernos, I can guarantee they could at least go on for around 10 rounds or more if he were to cast that whole set of spells. It would be a lot more annoying if he has any form of equipment that increases his mana, though. Do most mages have that sort of equipment? Brother Assist was standing at the side when he asked this. No. Drifting said, so there's a possibility he would swap them out at this moment. There's no way for archers to interrupt his casting. War Without Wounds looked over to the enemy, spotting Southern Lone Blade standing right in front of Flame-Singed Clothes. Any and all arrows sent towards Flame-Singed Clothes would all be blocked by this man, and they even had a priest healing right behind them. Could we not just forcefully rush them? Job classes with low HP would likely lose their lives if we were to forcefully rush them. Even if they managed to survive thanks to good fortune, the thief the enemy has on their side would just sneak right up to them and strike, young Master Han said, and everyone realized that Thief had already activated his stealth and disappeared from the squad before them. We really got careless this time. The terrain here is really ill-suited for us. Sword Demon said. Everyone was quiet. Here it comes. Royal God Call shouted, even as he saw Flame-Singed Clothes raise his magic staff to call forth a descending wheel of flames. Chapter 385, Crossing the Wall of Flames. Let's evade it before we discuss this further. Drifting cried out as everyone stepped into the firestorm before them once more. The blazing tree of 1,000 infernos slowly but surely depleted everybody's HP. But they had no choice but to bear it. Seeing Flame-Singed Clothes hide behind Southern Lone Blade's shield as he continued to display his prowess, War Without Wounds could only grit his teeth and bottle up his anger inside him. Drifting, cast your own spells to match his. Let's see who dies first. War Without Wounds spat acidly. No way. Drifting and Royal God Call both cried out at the same time. Royal God Call once more revealed an expression as if he had just swallowed poison, allowing Drifting to explain to War Without Wounds, that guy's cooldowns are reduced to the point where it's unreasonably short. I reckon in the time I can cast 2 spells, he would be able to toss at 5 in response. Who do you think will die first? Fuck, does that mean we're doomed to die like this? Should we call for help? Miles, perhaps? War Without Wounds grumbled. It would only take a single blink to get over to them had Miles been with us. Brother Assist said. These experts were usually rather irate with how Goofy's indomitability would often relegate them to a lesser role, but now that they were at such a critical juncture, each and every one of them missed him terribly. I'm afraid that guy won't be able to make it here in time unless he falls down from the heaven right now. The others yelled, even as they once more escaped from the sea of flames and back into the dead end. Don't just stand there, toss us all over. The experts felt disgruntled when they saw Flame-Singed Clothes recast his blazing tree of 1,000 infernos arrogantly upon the exact same spot the moment the previous one was about to extinguish. Drifting acquiesced to the request of the crowd, raising his magic staff to toss out a blazing tree of 1,000 inferno of his own. In the end, the enemy had already retreated back after finishing casting their spell, easily escaping to an area where Drifting was unable to reach them with his spells. They were all speechless. This was the difference between the terrain either side had to work with. The enemy had an escape, while they had nothing. Got it. Use your spell the next time he steps up. There's no way he can defend against flames that rise from the ground, right? Wouldn't you then be able to interrupt his spell casting in this manner? War Without Wounds looked to be as elated, as if he had just discovered the new world. Drifting and Royal Godcall stared at him together, but because Royal Godcall was more familiar with him, he brazenly glared at Wounds as if he were looking at an idiot. Don't blindly hazard a guess if you don't know anything. When it comes to a battle between two experienced mages, unless they are using instant cast spells, there's no way they would be able to create a situation where they could interrupt the other's spell. You can go and mull over the reason for this by yourself. Royal Godcall chided him. With that, he added, man, Miles' lightning spells would be able to interrupt the enemy's casting if he was here. It's such a pity we got this useless trash with us instead. Are we unable to survive this without Miles with us? War Without Wounds was in tears as he spoke. Watch what I can do. Royal Godcall triumphantly boasted. At this moment, the enemy's four-man squad was now back to their original position. Flame Cinched Close raised his staff and got ready to toss at a descending wheel of flame yet again when Royal Godcall roared, firing off an arrow with his arched bow, landing a hit right onto Southern Lone Blade's shield. Flame Cinched Close had finished his incantation, so the sky glowed fiery red once more as the seven men ran back towards the sea of flames with their hands covering their heads. Watch your damn head. War Without Wounds berated Royal Godcall. He originally thought that arrow of his was going to turn the tables, yet nothing changed. What do you know? Royal Godcall replied. After suffering the usual damage they took from standing in that sea of flames, everybody retreated back to their original position. Right at the moment that blazing tree of 1,000 infernos was about to die out, Royal Godcall once more drew his bowstring back and sent another arrow flying out. Just what does that rascal think he's doing? Even though there was a wall of fire and a sea of flames between the two teams, Southern Lone Blade and the others could still clearly see the action they were taking, so if Royal Godcall knew there was a warrior holding a shield blocking the attack, what was the point of him taking potshots like this for? Was he trying to use this method to slowly shave his HP down? Southern Lone Blade could not help but chuckle to himself mirthlessly. Even though Royal Godcall's ranged attack was far more fearsome than the average archer, he felt that Royal Godcall's attempts at reducing his HP would only result in those seven men dying before he did. He continued to block with his shield as he thought about this, not feeling at all surprised when he heard the resounding thunk of each arrow meeting his shield. But suddenly, he felt a sensation that he had never felt before travel through his shield. It was an attack that seemed to possess a sort of continuous force to it, nothing huge, yet it felt extremely swift. Before Southern Lone Blade could react to what could have caused this, he felt that force penetrate through his shield, even going so far as to pass through his body, as well. Am I about to die? Southern Lone Blade felt his heart lurch in that moment, but a quick glance at his HP saw that it had only lowered insignificantly, dealing the same amount of damage a basic attack would. Just as he calmed himself, he promptly heard a cry from behind him, "Fuck me. How did he shoot me?" Flame Cinched Close lowered his head and stared at his chest. There was no arrow stuck to him, yet he had felt a force pass through him. The damage was slight, yet it had managed to interrupt his spellcasting. Royal Godcall knew he had succeeded the moment the blazing tree of 1,000 inferno had ended, yet the new spell had yet to be unleashed. He turned round to raise a V sign to the other experts with him. Oh yeah, piercing attack. Royal Godcall's third bow, Point of Ephemera, had a 10% chance to pierce, and had poked for this shot. Let's go. Everyone did not even waste time to admire his pose as they seized that moment to charge ahead. Without the blazing tree of 1,000 inferno under their feet, everyone plunged through the palatial balefire with full HP. Perhaps the damage from palatial balefire was already enough to insta-kill them, but at least they were more confident broaching the wall of flame without having to traverse a sea of fire. With Flame Cinched Close's blazing tree of 1,000 inferno unexpectedly interrupted, and not being able to complete his cast in time, the spell was nevertheless still on cooldown. No one was more aware of how much damage Flame Cinched Close could deal than the man himself. He knew things had taken a turn for the worse when he saw the experts before them were about to charge across the row of flames. He did not spare a thought what would happen next, deciding to block off the situation before him before further discussing the matter in detail. He once more extended his magic staff and drew a line upon the ground as he yelled, Palatial balefire. Ignite. The 7 of them were all stunned when they heard this incantation. Everyone had already thought it was really ludicrous how Flame-Singed Clothes was able to consecutively maintain a sea of flames with his blazing 3 of 1,000 inferno. They had not expected Palatial balefire to be even more preposterous, as Flame-Singed Clothes was able to cast it before the last one he cast had even ended. Just as these 7 experts suspected he was trying to fool them, another wall of flame had already surged up to the sky. With 2 rows of flames aligned one after the other, the flames present looked all the more enchanting. These experts had the guts to try and brave one wall, but none of them were feeling confident now that there were 2 rows. Flame-Singed Clothes tossed out that palatial balefire and quickly pulled up his skills interface and examined it, finally sighing in relief after sweeping through the cooldown timers listed. He already had the perfect plan to force the enemy back to their original position once again, so this sudden change had been shocking, but not dangerous. Just as his heart eased up, he caught sight of Drifting step out from the crowd as he casted his spell, Icy Mirage. Split. Fuck, what's the point of using that now? Royal God Call rebuked as Drifting's Icy Mirage formed up. The 4 Driftings took a corner each, forming a square, and one of them had actually formed up past that wall of flames. Could it be? All the experts had the same thought when they saw this. Why would Southern Lone Blade and his men dare to be careless the moment they saw Drifting suddenly split into 4, with one of them right in front of them? They quickly hurtled towards him, only to see Drifting raise his magic staff high in the air, blossoming Crimson Lotus. Expand. 3 other Driftings were standing over by the side with young Master Han and the rest. The fact Drifting was willing to risk using this skill had already demonstrated the truth. The real Drifting was the one that had made it past that wall of flames, for that was the only Drifting whose blossoming Crimson Lotus would not reach the 6 of them. Ignoring if they received any damage or not, each of the blossoming Crimson Lotus for all 4 Drifting looked exactly alike, and in that instant, the flaming petals that bloomed from the 4 of them simultaneously looked to be no less intense and incandescent than the 2 palatial balefires. The self-proclaimed fire spell expert Flame-Singed Clothes instantly knew the sight before him was trouble as he quickly called for Southern Lone Blade to block it. Southern Lone Blade understood and already had his shield at the ready before him, with Flame-Singed Clothes and the priest immediately shrinking to take cover behind him. The burgeoning flames looked as if it was about to envelope all that stood in its way, but that unknown shield Southern Lone Blade had on him was truly extraordinary. It actually held back the blast of fire that sought to devour all in its path in a way that allowed the 3 men to take cover against this conflagration, leaving them unscathed as they watched the firestorm dumbfounded. While the 3 of them had managed to survive this tide of flames, the same could not be said for the stealth thief Blackwater. The moment Drifting appeared beyond the walls created by the palatial balefires, the man had already gotten close in hopes of dealing a backstab to the mage. Yet he did not expect Drifting to burst forth a spell that covered the whole 360 degrees around him. His stealth state was interrupted the very moment the fire touched him. Blossoming Crimson Lotus was a fire spell that pushed forth layers of damage like waves, so Blackwater could only watch as he saw his HP drop like a stone in a well. He knew escape was futile, so he decided to continue his charge instead, prepared to put his very life on the line in hopes of delivering this backstab to his target. A sudden whistle in the wind could be heard. Drifting hurriedly turned his head back the moment he heard this, and could not help but be shocked when he saw was a thief firmly clutching a pair of daggers in hand darting towards him. Before he could even react, the sound of metal plunging into flesh could be heard from the thief's back. That thief transformed into white light and disappeared within the fiery deluge. MMOs had always declared the death of players without a margin of error. As long as their HP were completely depleted, the victim would instantly disappear without even the slightest bit of struggle. So even though Blackwater's dagger was but 0.01 centimeters away from Drifting, not a single point of damage of that attack registered on the mage. On the other side of the firewall that continued to rage, Royal God Call tossed his bow aside, wailing aloud as his left hand held his right. Ah, will my hand rot as well? Southern Lone Blade and the 2 men with him were currently hiding behind that shield of his, so none of them had a clue when the spell Drifting used would end. They could only gape at the red-hot flames that rolled past, not daring to move an inch from their cover. They had no choice, no matter how experienced they were as experts, The fear of the unknown was the only feeling they had when faced against a spell they had not seen before. As for Flame-Singed Clothes huddled right behind him, he stood upright the moment he felt it was safe and immediately waved his magic staff. Fireball, shoot! Arg! Flame-Singed Clothes managed to toss out his fireball successfully, but he immediately took an arrow to his head in the next moment. It was the most powerful skill in Royal Godcall's arsenal, Snipe. No matter how indomitable a mage was, there was no way they would be caught wearing any equipment that gave high enough physical defense to weaken the damage of this physical attack Royal Godcall made. Flame-Singed Clothes was insta-killed right where he stood, leaving just that fireball he had tossed, which had no magical power now that it had lost the support of its owner. Even more pitiful were his two comrades, Southern Lone Blade and that priest. Witnessing Flame-Singed Clothes disappear the very second he stood up only made these two men shrink themselves deeper behind the shield, afraid to pop out from behind its safety. Chapter 386, Prioritizing Personal Interest with Flame-Singed Clothes' death. While the palatial balefire continued to rage on with great intensity, the experts all knew it practically had no function any longer. In accordance to the rules of Parallel World, any spell unleashed would become useless the moment they lost the support of the caster's mana. Thus, the 6 other experts who were still behind that palatial balefire confidently stepped through the wall of flames, and just as they had expected, not a single point of damage was dealt to them. By now, Drifting's blossoming Crimson Lotus had ended its pulse. Southern Lone Blade and that priest were pressed behind his shield as they watched that wave of flames roil past them. Southern Lone Blade naturally knew it had ended when he saw his HP had stopped diminishing. These two men slowly stood up, their expressions ashen. It was clear they no longer had the means to resist. "Why don't you tell us what your motive for following us now, South Blade Bro?" Young Master Han asked suddenly. "Motive? We're all MMO veterans, I'm sure you've already guessed what my motive is," Southern Lone Blade calmly replied. "So, what thoughts do you have now?" Young Master Han asked. "Gentlemen, when you make your trip back to Yunjuan City, I believe you will all have to pass by Linshui City. You guys will need to be as careful as you are today when that day comes. Otherwise, it is highly likely you would all meet up with some mishap," Southern Lone Blade coldly replied. "There's no need for you to worry for us. So do you intend to gamble this final hand, or quietly accept your fate?" Young Master Han asked. "Hey!" Southern Lone Blade chuckled mirthlessly as he suddenly stowed that sword and shield back into his dimensional pocket. Not only that, he swiftly removed all of his equipment and fit it into his dimensional pocket, and the priest did the same as well. Everybody present was dumbfounded. They could all clearly tell his intentions from the action taken. The system's rules stated that items inside a player's dimensional pocket had a lower chance of dropping than the equipment a player had on. This action they took was nothing more than protecting their own equipment. These experts felt nothing but deep loathing when they saw someone who possessed the puissant title of a 5 unyielding expert engage in such an unscrupulous practice. Upon being acknowledged as an expert, face was an extremely precious commodity, aside from their level and equipment. In fact, there were even players out there that would value their face far more than levels and equipment. Admitting to death was one thing, but not even a noob would act so parsimoniously and intentionally strip off their own equipment and place it into their dimensional pocket for safekeeping. Southern Lone Blade calmly laughed under their dumbfounded gazes. The team of experts nationally did not show any compassion and spare them, attacking without saying another word. The two naked and high-leveled players did not have any sort of defense on them, and their HP instantly dropped to 0. These experts were not satisfied, even going so far as to hold their most contemptuous stares at where the two once stood. "The two of you coordinate well with one another." Young Master Han turned his head back, glancing at Drifting before shifting over to Royal Godcall. The entire situation had been handily resolved by the efforts of these two rivals, and the wealth of experience and knowledge towards the mage job class they demonstrated in their analysis from the beginning, to Royal Godcall's pierce attack interrupting the enemy's spellcasting. And that interrupt was undeniably crucial, for had that blazing tree of 1,000 inferno continued to persist and result in everyone constantly taking damage, there would simply be no way for Drifting to chant his spell successfully. Thus, that single interrupt from Royal Godcall had created a window of opportunity that bought much needed time for Drifting to cast his Icy Mirage, and make it through the flame wall unharmed. Drifting followed it up with the unveiling of his blossoming Crimson Lotus spell and killed off the thief that was trying to sneak in, and Royal God Call once more decided the outcome of this battle when he headshot flame-singed clothes the moment he poked his head out and attempted to return fire. As the other experts were melee job classes, the moment those two remaining enemies stripped off their equipment, the fact that they would need to close in for the kill meant it was once more the two ranged attackers, Royal God Call and Drifting, that eliminated the two with a single raise of their arms. Drifting gave a non-committal chuckle when he heard young Master Han's comment, while Royal God Call exaggeratedly gagged in response, "Don't bring that up again. It makes me want to retch." Brother Assist chose this moment to hurriedly gather more information. "Ahem, Brother Drifting. Are you able to choose which of the 4 images will be where your real body ends up with that icy mirage skill of yours?" Brother Assist had plenty of experience with MMOs, so he had already inferred this fact after watching Drifting's usage of that spell, and was only getting confirmation of this right now. "That's right." Drifting freely admitted to it. Though the user has to pay twice the amount of mana needed when appearing in another place than where the real body originally resided. "Oh." Brother Assist resisted immediately pulling out that booklet of his to jot that down, as that would be far too ill-mannered. "So technically speaking, that could be considered to be an instantaneous translocation?" Brother Assist continued to ask. "Of course not." Drifting immediately answered. "The unique feature of instantaneous translocation is the fact that it would be instant. My incantation still requires a bit of time, so it cannot be considered to be an instantaneous translocation spell, since it isn't instant." Brother Assist recalled the scene from before, and indeed, when Drifting stepped forward to chant the spell, Icy Mirage only activated after Royal God Call ridiculed him for casting said spell. While it was not slow to the point that anyone could realize what was happening, the difference between that and Goofy materializing in and out of thin air with the point of his finger was heaven and earth. "So that's how it is," Brother Assist answered. He actually had plenty of questions still going through his mind, but he was well aware deep down that others might not be willing to reveal anything further if he continued to probe, and would merely make things all the more awkward. Hence, he ended his line of inquiry at that point, retreating back behind the stocky figure of War Without Wounds to take out his booklet and begin making a note of things. That Southern Lone Blade, to think he would be so lacking moral integrity in the end. War Without Wounds had begun to criticize their opponent at this time. As a fellow warrior, he had the credentials to critique that man for his actions. Had I been in his position, I would have activated my charge and cancelled it straight into Cyclone once I was in range. With a priest behind giving support for at least the moment, I would at least be confident I could take down Drifting with me. Drifting thought back to the position between the two parties back then and considered the capabilities that an expert warrior possessed, nodding calmly. "Yes, that would be difficult to evade." "See, that's why I'm saying, that guy's such a disappointment," War Without Wounds said disapprovingly. It was only natural War Without Wounds would not have too good of an opinion about that man. After all, he had always been known as the #1 warrior when it came to MMOs. To have his throne taken by this usurper in Parallel World, even though it was his own fault for having wasted quite a lot of time trying to flirt with the ladies, it made sense why he would choose to take out his discontent on this man whose level surpassed him. Young Master Han rolled his eyes in and said, "That man completely prioritized his personal interest before everything else. That in itself is a talent. Hey, he don't even have the guts to take a risk at the very end. What sort of talent is that?" War Without Wounds continued to disparage Southern Lone Blade. "It's not a matter of guts." Brother Assist stepped out from behind War Without Wounds after finishing making the notes from his conversation before. He sighed and continued, "It's not a matter of guts, nor is it because he did not have the ability to execute the sequence of moves War Without Wounds has described. It's because even if he had succeeded, there was no way for him to extricate himself from us, and he would earn a park point instead, which meant he would drop an entire 2 levels and even increase the chance of dropping his equipment or items. That's the real reason why he would not do what War Without Wounds has said." Young Master Han was right in saying he's a benefit-focused individual. That was when everybody remembered that Southern Lone Blade and Brother Assist were friends, so even though neither of them had shown any emotions towards this clash, They immediately dropped this discussion the moment they saw the expression Brother Assist wore and what he said. Ahem. War Without Wounds was the one that began disparaging Southern Lone Blade, so he quickly changed the topic. I wonder if they've finished escorting Todd. It should be soon. Young Master Han said. Why did you tell them their location? Can they really not catch up to them? War Without Wounds said. Of course not. Young Master Han laughed. The coalition of Lori City mercenary groups and Eternal War mercenary group were both anxiously rushing over to the North Gate at the moment. The players from Yunjuan City obviously could not just let them leave so easily, so they did their best to block and stall for time. But with how wide and expansive the terrain was, it was unrealistic for them to successfully intercept or block the lot of them. Many still managed to escape. Anybody could already foresee just how rowdy the North Gate would get. At this time, right outside the North Gate of Lori City, a woman and 2 other men were quietly making their way into the city. We're almost there. One of them revealed a look of elation and relief. It was an expression that came from the myriad feelings rising up now that victory was right before his eyes. Nevertheless, he made sure to utter these words in hushed tones. Yes. The woman beside him nodded in agreement. Her eyes revealed the look of a seasoned veteran, vigilantly regarding every player they came across after passing the gates. This way. The man who had been speaking was naturally the guild leader of Traversing 4 Seas, Oathless Sword. After entering the city, he led the others and took a right turn. The street looked more and more secluded, but he felt a shudder of excitement when he saw the entrance towards the prison laying right before him. That lady continued to vigilantly sweep her surroundings, noting several players passing by in a rush. Thus, she slowly began to ease up, her face slowly turning placid. To think it would really be so easy, Oathless Sword said, raising his voice by a few decibels. Yeah. The lady's stolid expression showed a slim smile. Please. Oathless Sword was relaxed, and his habit of flaunting before ladies came over him once more, gentlemanly gesturing for that lady to proceed before him up the stone steps that led to the prison entrance. What are you so pleased for? Your journey ends here. Someone suddenly interrupted. It was like Oathless Sword had suddenly been struck by lightning, not even looking to find out who said that line as he hurried to bolt towards the prison entrance, only to find several players burst forth from the doors of the prison, their bows at the ready, aimed at the 3 of them. Oathless Sword had no choice but to stop dead in his tracks. He had taken several steps up the stairs that led to the prison entrance. Standing on this elevated ground, Oathless Sword turned back in the direction where the voice had came from and saw a man who had been lying up on a roof, now sitting upright and flashing a cheeky smile at Oathless Sword. I've made it in time, fortunately. Deep Waters. Oathless Sword cried out, his voice cracking. It's me. Did the big boss man think our competitive quest would end just because you left Arlinian City? Let me share something with you, a mission isn't over until the very last moment. Deep Waters was feeling exceptionally wonderful right now. Chapter 387, Trap. Yet another trap. Oathless Sword's expression turned ashen. At the first chance he got, he sent out a message to young Master Han. Grap. Deep Waters is here. Deep Waters? Young Master Han was astonished when he got the message. He was not taken aback by the fact they had encountered trouble, but was instead shocked that Deep Waters would actually expend so much effort to hound them all the way to Lori City. Even Deep Waters is here? The others nationally exclaimed when they heard the news. Young Master Han helplessly nodded. That guy's always such a pest. War Without Wounds nodded in understanding, even showing an expression of pride as he commented, to be able to stay together with a lady for 7 MMOs, you can imagine how great he is at being a pest. The others glared at him in contempt. Now what do we do? Brother Assist anxiously asked. What else can we do? There's no way he can make it in time. Young Master Han shrugged. Did you not make any arrangements for such an event? Everybody present was clear when it came to young Master Han's temperament, and his penchant for acting shocked, just to keep everyone on their toes. Of course I did. It only makes sense to save Aris in the hole for the most crucial conundrum, young Master Han replied. Miles? Everyone exclaimed in unison. Young Master Han neither confirmed nor denied this, which was as good as admitting to it. Miles has always been with them? Everybody asked. There were various moving parts for this current plan of theirs. The average player would only know a small portion of them, which was what most of the players from Lori City were aware of. The experts here naturally knew another portion of the plan, that Todd would take a different route into the city. At this point, none of them were aware of anything regarding Todd's safety, and they had reason to believe that perhaps Oathless Sword himself had no idea of this either. This was where young Master Han's sadistic nature really infuriated people. Oathless Sword's group left for the North Gate, which isn't too far away from the prison, young Master Han explained. Oh. The experts hummed together. They had long suspected that young Master Han had been lying when he said Todd was headed to the North Gate, but it turned out to be otherwise. Since the prison was near the North Gate, it made no difference if they entered via the East or North Gate. The only difference would be whether they traveled outside the city, or inside it. But how did you know the prison was near the North Gate? Did you have a friend here? Brother Assist asked. Young Master Han shook his head. Miles told me. Miles? He's got a friend here? Everyone was all the more astonished at this fact. They knew Gufei was a MMO newbie, so it was impossible for him to have any sort of old acquaintances in this game. Miles was the first to enter Lori City. He inquired after the route with some of the locals before suggesting that I send Oathless Sword over to the North Gate. Young Master Han elaborated. He was the first to enter the city. Why? Just to inquire after the route? Everybody was still confused. He only did that in passing. More importantly, he needed to clear off the park value he had on him, young Master Han said. Oh. Everybody immediately understood. With Gufei's high park value, slaying a few more people would easily result in him breaking the 30 ceiling once more. Considering the whole buttload of trouble that came with it, it was better if he cleared up what he could before a huge battle like this. They dared believe that he must have been equally busy himself in these past few hours, like everybody else. At this point, the entirety of young Master Han's master plan had been laid out. In this final push, the players from Yunjuan City were split into 4 separate fronts. The first was made up of the majority of the players. While they were further split into 4 parties, they were actually considered to be a single front, meant to draw the attention of the enemy. The second was young Master Han and the team of elites he led. Pretending to head down the valley like this, they were acting as a diversion specifically for those elites from Lori City that could see through the first layer of his plan, as well as the men who had been stalking them for reasons unknown, who had turned out to be Southern Lone Blade and his squad. The 7 men sprawling upon that large boulder viewing the matter from afar had long been spotted by young Master Han. The spyglass he borrowed from Vast Lushness was far more powerful than a sharpshooter's eagle eyes. Not only did he know it was a 7-man squad, he even identified SLB himself. Everything else that happened afterwards had successfully played out in the exact manner he had directed. The third front here was naturally the small team led by Oathless Sword that had Todd in tow. They mixed in with the players that were grinding and slowly made their way away from the battle, looking exactly like any of those grinders. With how both of those sides were neck deep in each other, why would there be anyone out there who would notice this small detail? The fourth and final front was Gufei alone. Obviously, he was not the object of anybody's attention since he was running solo, and with his fast movement speed, he had long since made his way to Lori City and began to clear his park points doing bounty missions. He was meant to step out only at the critical moment to save Oathless Sword from any potential disaster. So will Miles make it in time? Everyone was still rather worried. Young Master Han did not reply to them. Outside the prison, Oathless Sword and Vast Lushness were standing on Todd's left and right respectively. At the moment, there was a group of archers right outside the entrance blocking their path into the building. Up on the roof, Deep Waters had already stood up, condescendingly regarding them with folded arms as he gleefully said, "Bet you didn't think I would make an appearance here, am I right? Why would you be here?" Oathless Sword was also a veteran of the MMO Jianghu, talking to stall for time even as he noted the current situation he found himself in. Deep Waters did not seem to have too many men with him. He would have no problems holding on if he had more men with him right now, but it was a pity that all he had was Vast Lushness and himself. "So, bet you didn't expect this at all." Deep Waters laughed. "Yeah, I totally did not expect this at all. How did you track us down?" The 3-man team of Oathless Sword, Vast Lushness, and Todd had managed to elude everybody trying to get a beat on their whereabouts. Yet they did not think that Deep Waters could so confidently camp out by the prison like this. While that was truly surprising to him, he was honestly not too bothered by the answer to this question. All he was thinking about at the moment was how he could drag this out as much as possible. I'll just tell you this one detail. As a guild, it is a requirement for members to wear their emblem in the most prominent place, just like you. Deep Waters did not fall for Oathless Sword's ploy, saying all this as simply as possible after picking at the emblem he wore on his chest. What do you mean by that? Oathless Sword asked loudly. Deep Waters was already ignoring him by this point, and raised his hand. Kill them both. Just as he gave this command, a flash of light appeared among the archers at the top of the steps. Someone had actually been insta-killed. A fiery red figure had already appeared on the top of the steps, looking absolutely chivalrous and heroic as their short dagger flurried in the air in rounding slices. That figure even used its body as a weapon, knocking people all around as it capitalized on the uselessness of archers in melee range. As predicted, this person's rampage within the two ranks of archers left them all at a loss as to what to do. Quite a few of these archers had already dispersed and fired off their arrows, causing a whole mess of arrows to fly in every direction. Deep Waters up on the roof quickly retracted his head back from the edge, as an arrow brushed within centimeters of his hair. "It's you again." It was now Deep Waters' turn to get mad. The red figure that appeared was none other than Svelte Dancer, the same lady that had slain him back in Linian City. He was somewhat frustrated that she had once again appeared to upset things at such a crucial moment, yet he was even more aware of just how indomitable this woman was. Sending this lot of archers to face her head-on was as good as courting death. Svelte Dancer did not even bother to look at Deep Water as she stabbed her dagger wildly at any archer that looked to be firing their bows, while these archers attempted to flee in all directions in their panic. Oathless Sword was over the moon when he saw this, using the opportunity he had been given to continue his charge to the prison, but he did not expect an arrow from behind to land on his foot. Oathless Sword believed he would definitely not be insta-killed by this one shot, so he did not take it seriously. However, he heard a sound of metal clanking in the next moment by that foot as a trap, a size smaller than the usual hunter's trap that hunters use, sprang out and snared his foot in place. The jaws of the trap might be small, but Oathless Sword instantly found it difficult to move even an inch from his position. All the archers had been scattered by Svelte Dancer and distanced themselves sufficiently by this point, and the metallic door that opened into the prison stood freely before Oathless Sword, yet he was unable to even move. The level of anxiety he was feeling right now almost caused him to puke blood. Svelte Dancer had been busy clearing a path, yet she spotted no movement behind her. She turned her head towards Oathless Sword and yelled furiously, "Get in there already, what are you posing for?" Oathless Sword felt like crying, but no tears came out as he replied, "I'm trapped." Two thud sounds could be heard as two more arrows found their way into Oathless Sword's body. Svelte Dancer was powerful, but fighting an enemy that numbered far above her own forces. While she may have managed to kill off two players in this one charge of hers, the remaining archers had dispersed in different directions and those who had the chance made sure to fire an arrow towards Oathless Sword. Thankfully, Oathless Sword was a warrior through and through, so taking two arrows like this was not too much of a problem. Vast Lushness was also by his side, hastily bestowing her heals on him. However, no one knew how long the trap would take before it ran its course. Using those traps they encountered in Linian City as a reference, Oathless Sword figured it would at least take a minute before he could move again, causing an insurmountable level of anxiety to surge within him. And suddenly felt something loosen by his ankles. He looked down and saw that the trap had actually fallen off. Without a moment of hesitation, he took a large stride to continue his way onwards, yet instantly heard another metallic clang by his foot. Oathless Sword felt his stomach lurch as he lowered his head to look. The old trap was gone, yet a new metallic jaw was now clamping down on his foot. Oathless Sword was almost driven crazy at this point, certain that it was Deep Water's handiwork, who was still up on the roof behind him. He spun his head around, looking to curse and vent his anger for a bit, yet was instead the recipient of an arrow hurtling right towards his temple, which left him speechless as his mouth hung agape. Vast Lushness was shocked on her end, seeing him like this made her think he was about to die, so she quickly threw 2 more heals over to him. Because Vast Lushness had advanced into the Dark Priest job class advancement, the effects of her heals were nothing like before. Fortunately, she was a priest that focused her stats purely on intelligence, so the heal she bestowed reflected this perfectly. It was at least able to do what it was meant to do. Svelte Dancer was hoping she could help alleviate the danger and was chasing the archers in a hurry when in her carelessness, she heard a clink of metal underneath her feet. She looked down and discovered that she had actually been ensnared by a trap as well. She glanced about at the ground around her and finally realized that the whole lot of these hunters that Deep Waters had brought along had been tossing out traps all over this flight of steps as they escaped. Normally, this sort of trap that was not properly buried would not be able to catch anybody, but the steps that led up to the prison were not particularly wide, and with how many traps they had tossed out, all it took was a moment of negligence for Svelte Dancer to be caught in one. Chapter 388, Heebie-Jeebies. Ha 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 ha. Deep Waters laughed in great delight up on that rooftop. The trap Svelte Dancer had triggered was not a snare shot, but one of the hunter's traps that his comrades had placed, which lasted for over a minute. No matter how amazing her equipment was, he doubted she had anything on her that would resist traps. Now that she had been ensnared, Svelte Dancer indeed had no tricks up her sleeves to extricate herself from it, so all she could do was grit her teeth and bear it. Deep Waters celebrated on his end while he fired off another shot over to where Oathless Sword's foot was. Everything was going as he had expected. The NPC Todd they had been escorting mindlessly followed Oathless Sword's own footsteps, so now that Oathless Sword was standing still, Todd was also obediently standing by his side, immobile. The other hunters had scattered all over the steps by now and were all drawing their bows and targeting Svelte Dancer with their shots. This lady had run them haggard the whole time, so it was only natural they wanted to vent a little. In the end, despite having so many arrows embedded all over her, Svelte Dancer still managed to stand her ground and survive. Even Deep Waters could not help but take a sharp breath. Even though his comrades were all hunters who focused on equipment that boosted their traps and were incomparable to sharpshooters when it came to their attack power, the fact that they were unable to kill off this lone thief Svelte Dancer, even with so many men firing, only showed just how insanely powerful her equipment was. Everybody was amazed. There were even those who now harbored ill intentions, hoping Svelte Dancer would drop a few top-tier items upon death as they hurriedly fired their arrows in rapid succession. In the end, all Vast Lushness did was bestow a heal upon the lady and Svelte Dancer easily got through this round of fire. Deep Waters knit his brows and shouted, "Kill that priest first." Vast Lushness was the only one out of the three that was free to move about. Given the vast amount of combat experience on her shoulders, she had long expected them to quickly change their target to her, so she had proactively taken evasive action before they could lock her down. But before the enemy could even comment on the action she had taken, it was Oathless Sword who was the first to wail, "Sister, you can't do that." Vast Lushness had been a woman of few words as the two of them traveled, yet Oathless Sword had never expected her actions to be so brazenly absurd, for she had actually hidden behind Todd's meager frame, essentially using their escort as a shield. While it was true that Todd managed to survive the concentrated bombardment back in Linian City back then thanks to his humongous HP pool, the issue is no one had any idea how much HP the NPC had left after that devastating assault. Oathless Sword had tried to get priests to heal him back then, yet it did not seem to have any effect. He had been really worried that Todd might have been dangling off just 1 horsepower, which only made the matter all the more tragic. Throughout this exchange between their forces, Oathless Sword had been rejoicing over the fact that Deep Waters and his men had been focusing their attack on the players and were in no hurry to attack Todd. But in the end, Vast Lushness' actions had drawn their attention back over to Todd as a result. Since it was just a matter of time before they had to deal with Todd, these players did not relent in the slightest as they continued the rain of arrows, not caring if they struck Vast Lushness or Todd. Oathless Sword's heart would shudder with every shot that landed on Todd. Countless arrows had landed, yet Todd remained standing. Oathless Sword's heart rate was already at 150 beats per minute at this point, which in turn caused the system to promptly issue a red alert. Due to the player's heart rate severely increasing beyond the safety threshold, The user will be forcefully disconnected from the game if he or she is unable to recover back within the acceptable limits in the next 3 minutes. How could he let himself be forcefully disconnected at this crucial moment? Oathless Sword only became even more tense when he received this system prompt, his heart rate escalating to nearly 200 beats per minute, resulting in the system sending out a warning yet again. Due to continued acceleration of the player's heart rate, the user will now be forcefully disconnected from the game if he or she is unable to recover back within the acceptable limits in the next 1 minute. Oathless Sword hurriedly shut his eyes and took a deep breath, exhaling deeply as he told himself to keep calm. Todd's invincible and will not die, he's an immortal. Meanwhile, up on that rooftop, Deep Waters was also rather surprised. Vast Lushness having the audacity to use Todd as a shield was one thing, but the position that she took actually blocked the very angle he needed to continue firing off his snare shot at Oathless Sword's foot. Deep Waters quickly attempted to change his position on the roof, but soon discovered that the lady had her eye on him the whole time, moving in accordance with where he moved, stopping this move of his entirely. That lady even went as far as to wave her magic stave toward him in retaliation. A black fog formed on the tip of her staff, and Deep Waters suddenly felt a bout of dizziness overcome him and lower his HP. She's a dark priest. Deep Waters gasped to himself. That dizziness that overcame him had been applied when he was near the edge of the roof, but thankfully it had only been a fleeting sensation, so Deep Waters was able to quickly change his position after firing off his arrow. Vast Lushness wanted to block that shot for Oathless Sword, but she was still slower by just 1 step. Just as Oathless Sword felt his foot loosen up, it was ensnared yet again before he could even open up his eyes. Vast Lushness had also taken an arrow shot because she exposed herself for that one shot, so she immediately cast a heal on herself. Seeing there was this experienced lady messing things up for them, Deep Waters figured they might be in a spot of trouble if any one of his arrows were to miss, so he quickly ordered his men, trap. Increasing the duration of traps was only one aspect which these hunters sought to improve through their equipment. The other aspects their equipment helped improve was the number of traps they could place. Adding that to their already high skill proficiency, each of them could easily place 3 or 5 traps of their own, each. The streets in cities were mostly paved, making it impossible to conceal these traps. But since 2 out of the 3 were unable to move, while another was pinned behind Todd and did not dare to move, these men blatantly rushed up and filled the stairs with traps. There was really not that many steps by this flight of stairs in front of the prison, nor was it that wide. After each of them were finished placing all the traps there, the entire stairs were packed with so many traps that it was a truly disgusting sight. This was already an extremely disgusting execution of trap utilization, as the huge pile of gleaming traps laid out would make anybody's skin crawl just looking at it. Anyone would already have the heebie-jeebies just attempting to tiptoe their way through if they were hoping to make their way across safely. This was especially true for Svelte Dancer, whose most discernible advantage over every player was her fast movement speed. But now that the area all around her had been morphed into such a trap-filled scene, how could she even demonstrate this? She would most likely bristle with arrows like a porcupine by the time she managed to tiptoe through and reach her enemies. These men had studied the situation for a long time. It seemed they had littered their traps everywhere, yet the end product was an interesting mess that did not seem to have any path out. Meanwhile, all the hunters immediately retreated out of the circle of traps they had set, as they were all ranged job classes. There was absolutely no need for them to be nearby. Ha 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 ha. So, do the 3 of you still have any brilliant ideas left? Deep Waters smarmily goaded them. What are you being long-winded for? Hurry up and do it already. A woman's voice could suddenly be heard in the air. Oathless Sword, Vast Lushness and Svelte Dancer did not see who this voice came from, but they knew it must have been a thief in stealth. Let's get to work, everyone. Shoot however you wish, creatively express yourself. Deep Waters commanded as he took the lead to fire off an arrow, targeting Svelte Dancer with his first shot. That jerk! Didn't he say he would appear at the most crucial moment? Svelte Dancer chided. Oathless Sword had been very surprised when he saw Svelte Dancer appear as she did, and had no idea there was still another savior out there. He hurriedly asked, who else could there be? He sighed even as an arrow landed on the corner of his mouth. Players would usually not feel anything when an attack landed on them, but anything that struck their head, while also dictated under the same pain system Parallel World used, still had an instinctive psychological fear attached to it. Who else could be coming to save them? Deep Waters could not help but feel anxious when he heard them. The situation right now was more or less under control, but they still had no idea how many HP Todd had left. They had already bombarded him once in Linian City, and now that he had not reacted to the arrows they had fired on him, was it possible that his HP would automatically regenerate? Deep Waters' heart shattered when this thought came to mind. If that spell bombardment from his group of mages before were unable to kill him, just how long would he and his current team of hunters have to fire? Who knew what sort of changes might happen if this dragged on? That whole mass of mercenaries from Lori City were still in a hurry to find their target. Deep Waters had come out on this pursuit without bringing all his manpower with him. Furthermore, he had left another portion of his men behind in Linshui City. Back then they had originally planned to wait for the next ferry, but that changed the moment they heard a report about how the battle was going for the players of Yunjuan City, with Oathless Sword quietly bringing Todd into the city, likely without anyone to impede him. Deep Waters and his men would surely be unable to catch up to them if they had to wait for 4 hours for the system's ferry. But how could they reach him without any boat? The barman by Linshui Harbor saw their anxious expressions and upon being informed of their situation, had instantly promoted the ferrying business some players had started. This was not like the ferry business scam that Gufei and the two ladies had taken, but was a proper business at the bars by the harbor started by the guilds had opened in conjunction. This was originally a few boats that these guilds had prepared for their private use that they would occasionally use, but when they realized they would be idle for huge periods of time, they figured it made sense to make a business out of this that others might need. Deep Waters had no choice but to accept it, but it was unfortunate that there was a limit to the number of players they could ferry. Even though it was not just a single boat, they had no means to ferry every single member in Deep Waters' party across. So, he could only pick a handful of players to accompany him in an effort to continue his pursuit. Had he really waited another 4 hours to take the system-assigned ferry, everything would have been long over. Deep Waters had departed late, but because they were all job classes with inherently high movement speed, they were able to reach the prison before Oathless Sword and the others. Deep Waters had also brought priests and mages along, but because he was racing against time to catch up to them, he could only leave those players behind. That was the reason why they only had hunters present here outside the prison right now, since his mages and slower job classes had yet to make it over. Deep Waters' heart beat in trepidation once he heard that the enemy was still expecting someone to save them. He was standing on high ground and could see quite a distance. He looked all around and only saw normal players, finding no one that looked to be conducting a rescue. But before he could even breathe easy, he suddenly heard the sound of a creaking door. The place where the prison was situated was very quiet. With both parties engaged in battle, one side being unable to retaliate while the other was only firing arrows, the only sound was the whistles made by the arrows, so this abrupt creaking was extremely audible and harsh. Everyone subconsciously turned towards this sound, and across the street not too far from the prison was an inconspicuous building where a door was being pulled open. A man dressed in a black mage's robe, holding a dark purple sword in hand, walked out. His eyes strained over to their direction in the blink of an eye. This man's pace quickened as he raised his hand to wipe away his sweat. "What are you hurrying me for? What's the situation? Aren't you all still alive? Fuck, what took you so long?" Svelte Dancer was incensed. The trap she had stepped on just finished as she began to walk over to this newcomer gingerly, but she soon found herself snared by a second trap in a moment's folly. "That guy I was hunting just now ran real far. I spent a long time hunting him down, but at least I'm here now." The man closed in on them, the sword on his shoulder came slicing down, pointing out forward obliquely. It was the gesture for a mage's spell. Chapter 389, A Swathe of Traps. Deep Waters had not taken such a vantage point for show. This position actually guaranteed he would be able to initiate an attack on the streets around him from any angle. Without any hesitation, Deep Waters drew his bow and fired an arrow towards the newcomer. Naturally, this person making his way over was Gufei. The large building he had walked out of was Lori City's bounty assignment hall, where he had been busy cleansing his park value. That person whom he had just slain was a player at a grinding zone outside of the city. When he received the message from YMH informing him of the need for assistance by the prison, he figured it would be faster to just quickly finish off his target and teleport back to the bounty assignment hall after, rather than turn back from where he had been, especially given how close both the prison and bounty assignment hall were. Thus, after he had slain his bounty target and teleported back to the hall, the first thing he saw stepping out was Oathless Sword and the others escorting Todd, coming under intense arrow fire right by the stairs outside the prison. Gufei had not even noticed that the entire area was filled with traps, but he figured they must have surely been held down in place or something, so he swiftly hurried over with a wave of his sword, prepared to send forth an AO spell towards the crowd of enemies before him. But before he could even begin his spell incantation, he felt a bout of murderous intent coming from above his head and looked up, only to find Deepwater's bow releasing an arrow straight towards him. This arrow came towards him blindingly fast, but more importantly, it came without making a bit of a sound. Had there been any sound, Gufei would of course be able to evade it the instant it was fired, but in the end, he only realized it was coming towards him after he turned his head and caught sight of it. Gufei had already sensed the killing intent in that particular person, but given how close these two men were to one another, the soundless arrow cut through the air at such speed that even Gufei found himself scrambling a little, sliding the sword he had pointed out across his body as he used the tip to deftly touch the incoming arrow, bringing it down before it did any serious damage. The others were all dumbfounded by this. Even Gufei himself felt a little strained from this one move, with his face turning slide red as a result. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly heard the clink of metal and Gu instantly had a bad feeling come over him. He lifted his leg in an effort to evade, but it was already too late. The speed at which the metallic jaws of the trap from Deepwater's snare shot sprang out was much faster than the usual hunter's trap, and with a lack of dirt in its way as it sprang forth, no matter how quick his reflexes were, there was no way he could make it in time. The intricate jaw shot towards him, biting squarely onto his leg without fail. "You're so stupid." Svelte Dancer had been hoping for the arrival of a savior, yet she did not expect said savior would end up like this. They already had plenty of experiences watching Deepwater's shoot out his snare shot and were well aware that its cooldown and duration were the same. After all, was that not why Oathless Sword had been trapped in place all this while? But now that Oathless Sword was now caught within the array of traps all around, they no longer had to particularly target him like before, which was why Deepwaters had immediately sent his snare shot towards Gufei. Then, "What are you panicking for?" Gufei appeared to be very composed, however, which was the same moment Deepwaters yelled out, "Kill that man first." Svelte Dancer and Oathless Sword were both melee job classes, while Vast Lushness was a dark priest without much attack power to begin with. Naturally, they could only suffer through the arrows from the archers now that they were ensnared, but Gufei was a mage. He was more than capable of dealing out ranged attacks, capable of insta-killing with just one cast of his spell to all deserving of death. It did not seem to matter if he was trapped or otherwise, so he had to be the first to be killed. All the hunters turned to target him, and Vast Lushness was instantly anxious. Gufei had been caught in Deepwater's trap after taking those few steps. The archers could all shoot him, yet she was unable to heal Gufei since he was currently positioned a little bit too far for her skills to reach him. Thinking that Gufei was the only hope left for everyone, Vast Lushness decidedly leapt out as far as she could, clearing over a meter in that one jump. While she had doubtlessly landed on a trap with this one move, it only restricted her movement. She was still able to use her skills in her current state, and Vast Lushness raised her hand and bestowed a heal upon Gufei. Deepwaters saw how heroic this lady acted, and that leap she took brought her out from behind Todd, whom she had been using as a meat shield all this while. He thought to himself, "You're clearly risking your life here. Can just a measly priest like yourself be enough to save him?" In the end, he witnessed a scene that left him the most flabbergasted ever since he started Parallel World. Everybody had already released their arrows, but Gufei was already ready. His right hand was still holding on to his sword, and his left hand pulling out a saber from his dimensional pocket. Both hands flurried as he immediately demonstrated an authentic display of swordsmanship that flashed both sword and saber, The arrows that hurtled straight towards him were all deflected off. Even though some arrows still managed to make it through, the HP Gu Fei lost from taking those few arrows were easily replenished with vast lushness's heal. Everybody was dumbfounded after firing this cluster of arrows. Each of their mouths were hanging agape as they went off for the longest time, before finally exclaiming, "Motherfucker, what sort of acrobatics was that?" All these archers had forgotten about firing a second wave of arrows, but Gu Fei's hands did not stop. Dropping the last arrow to his feet with the sword in his right hand, he whirled his left wrist and lifted his sacred flames of baptism in reverse, casually thrusting a backhanded blow from under his arm. Arg! A shrill cry instantly came from behind him, as this stab had been entirely unexpected. Twin incineration, incinerate! Gu Fei chanted. Moonlit nightfalls in his right hand had already lashed out, but because the trap he was caught on restricted his movements entirely, Gu Fei had to twist his waist quite exaggeratedly. This move was not smoothly executed due to his improper footing, allowing the person behind him to retreat with that stab of the saber, and the sword brushed past without making contact at all. Gu Fei could only sigh when this happened. Had it not been for the fact he could not move his foot accordingly, it would have been impossible for this opponent to get away from his slash. Coco. The slash missed its target entirely, but Deep Waters had anxiously yelled out, leaping off the rooftop he had been on this whole time without caring for anything else as he sailed towards where Gu Fei was standing. Gu Fei immediately stuck his sword out when he saw this, electric wall, fall. Ah, fuck me. Deep Waters cursed in midair. He originally looked extremely cool leaping off the roof like that, but he had not expected Gu Fei to suddenly erect a wall to block him like that. Deep Waters was instantly caught in that wall, looking like a tiger pouncing upon its prey. Even more unfortunate was how electric wall had a sort of absorption effect to it. The wall suspended him in the air in that same pose, looking more like a lizard as the electric current coursed through him, spitting out sparks from time to time. Ah! Deep Waters. That person behind Gu Fei seemed to have ignored Gu Fei at this instant, darting over towards the electric wall while looking up at the deep water stuck up in the wall. Quick, let him down! That person demanded angrily as she turned towards Gu Fei. It was at this moment he realized this person was a lady. He instantly realized the relationship between this woman and Deep Waters, but all he did was smile. Just wait a while. The trap that snared him released at this point, so Gu Fei darted out. That lady wanted to block him from approaching, but Gu Fei easily spun around to pass her as he sprinted towards the archers. These men looked as if they had awoken from a trance as they raised their bows to fire. Gu Fei's sword and saber combo was invincible, littering the ground with arrows whereof he ran. Quite a few arrows made it past his guard, for it was difficult for him to flawlessly swat every arrow away even if he was more skilled than he was. Thankfully, Vast Lushness was around to cast her heals on him and allowed him to survive through the damage. Had he been taking all these men on his own, there was a good chance that he might have already perished under the constant train of arrows. Beware of traps! Svelte Dancer hurriedly cried out this reminder when she saw how Gu Fei rushed forward without even slowing down. He was about to enter the whole swathe of traps those hunters had set up. Even though Gu Fei had blink, it only allowed him to cross a 5-meter distance, which was not enough to materialize right beside these men. Yet Gu Fei had already clearly seen that even though the traps were densely packed, there were still plenty of spaces between them, and when these gaps registered under his eyes, he easily figured out the various paths he could take using the footwork that he was well versed in since his youth. Without any exaggeration, had it not been for the fact that there was elevation on this flight of stairs, Gu Fei would actually have been able to avoid all the traps and make his way through everything with his eyes closed, as long as he successfully took his first step. Everyone watched as Gu Fei came running towards them without slowing down in the least, taking each step without fail in the gaps between the traps, moving right up to the first hunter in several steps. This hunter was holding his bow in his left hand and arrow in his right at the moment, and had no idea how he could defend himself. So he turned to run. Gu Fei was quick, swiftly tossing out his self-made skyhook onto that man's collar as he tossed the other end of the rope towards Oathless' sword. Oathless' sword was naturally beside himself when he grabbed a hold of it. Having stood here acting like a live target for these hunters had nearly bored him to death, but now that he finally had his hands on something to do. With a guttural bellow, he pulled the rope. What little strength that hunter had was nothing compared to what Oathless sword possessed. This man was instantly floored with that forceful jerk, and was then inhumanely dragged across the trap-laden ground towards him. Each trap snapped and clamped onto this person's body, ending up at Oathless sword's feet in a blink of an eye. Oathless sword was addicted to this. He reached out to that hunter and picked him up to toss him right out once more, before giving a good tug on the rope. Unfortunately, that hook that caught onto this man's collar was not secured enough for this sort of rough handling, causing the hook to slip off in that throw as it ended up back in his hand, but without the player. Now that Oathless sword was left with nothing to play, he tossed the sky hook back to Goofy. Miles bro, get me another. Goofy was currently engaged with several of those hunters at once, so when Oathless sword threw the hook towards him, he randomly picked one of them and hooked that person's clothes. That person reached out in panic, hoping to remove it, but Oathless sword had already given it a strong tug, and that man was yanked from where he was standing in an instant. Goofy's twin incineration insta-killed 2 men beside him, before he bolted towards the next target. The number of archers dropped, and the arrows they fired were no longer that much of a threat to him. Vast Lushness no longer needed to use her heal to assist him, and was instead using her mana sacrifice to provide him a constant stream of mana instead. Oathless sword had managed to drag in another player. He had immediately lost control of the previous player when he tossed him out, so he was currently wondering if he should just slay this man on the spot or secure the hook a little bit better when Svelte Dancer cried out, hopping eagerly, "Toss him over here, toss him to me." Oathless sword did not put too much thought into this, answering heartily with an alright. As he heaved that man over towards her, that man crashed and tumbled onto the ground, immediately destroying quite a few traps with his landing. Svelte Dancer stretched her leg out and stopped him. She then adjusted the direction of the man before making him roll out with a powerful kick. That man cleared out the traps on the ground in his disoriented state. The direction he went tumbling out and caused quite a few of these hunters to panic, as the man had managed to clear a path for Svelte Dancer to charge in towards them. Chapter 390. The opponent was far too indomitable. The poor man whom Svelte Dancer had kicked out went rolling like a bowling ball, while the hunters that stood in his way looked no more than bowling pins. The men hurriedly tried to fire off their arrows at the incoming thief, but the equipment she had on was simply far too powerful. Svelte Dancer blocked those arrows that she could block, evaded those that she could evade, not caring a least bit at those that struck her squarely on her body. In the next moment, that bowling ball had cleared off an entire lane for her, allowing Svelte Dancer to dash forward right behind it. What chance did these men have to escape her grasp now? A bludgeon incapacitated one, while a stab with her dagger killed another. One of them panicked and instantly stepped onto one of their own traps they had set up, which indiscriminately snapped down onto its owner when it was triggered. What else was needed to be said? Svelte Dancer calmly dispatched the whole lot of them, ignoring the woeful cries from the player who had traps stuck all over his body as she adjusted his direction once more, and kicked him towards the other pins remaining. Over by the other side, Deep Waters was still stuck up on the electric wall. The moment the 20-second duration of the electric wall ended, he dropped down even as his body continued to twitch and convulse. He was shaking as he tried to stand, with Coco getting zapped the moment she reached out to support him, as if she had been hit by a wave of electric current. Her arm shot back reflexively, and Deep Waters collapsed to the ground immediately now that there was no one to hold him up. Coco gingerly reached her hand out once more to probe, making sure the electric current was gone before quickly supporting him. Deep Waters was a little faint after being electrocuted, so his eyes were a little glazed. Coco hugged his head and shook it lightly, shouting out his name twice before he finally came back to his senses. "Fuck!" Deep Waters immediately rasped out a curse the moment he came to, waving the bow still in his hand as he yelled, "Where is that man?" That man was right in front of him, for Goofy had already found his way into the array of traps they had set up. Deep Waters watched as this man made it into the array with every step he took, yet he was entirely unscathed as he continued his massacre of everybody present. Those poor men he had brought along were now nothing but helping him demean the area. Even Oathless Sword was having fun as things stood. Deep Waters ground his teeth angrily, knocking his bow as he sought to fire. "Be careful." Vast Lushness had been keeping her eye on him all this while, and instantly called out to everyone a warning the moment she saw him move. Oathless Sword was having plenty of fun right now, standing still as he dragged the man he had hooked in every direction, entirely unbothered if he was standing onto a trap or not. Seeing Deepwater's about to fire another shot, he immediately puffed out his chest and braced for the shot in retaliation. "Ha ha, come on now. Shoot me." A whistle of air, and that air landed squarely upon his temple. He had actually been prepared to fire this shot at the person who was the most difficult to handle, but the look of smug arrogance that Oathless Sword had on his face was unbearable, so he decided to give this man his attack instead. Oathless Sword had plenty of arrows find their way to his head today, and even though he had yet to die from them, part of the effect that came with being shot was how it would symbolically cause them to bleed. A bit of bleeding here, another trickle there, had essentially dyed his whole head red, like some sort of horrifying clown. He originally thought Deepwaters would fire another snare shot at him, yet who knew that a snipe would find its way to his temple instead. Just as he was about to curse back at him without restraint, Vast Lushness snapped at him. "What sort of monkey business are you getting into? I don't have the time to take care of you right now." Oathless Sword thought that what she said made a lot of sense. Gufei was the main combat power they had right now, and Vast Lushness was currently using her unique skill to maintain his mana, so where could she spare any for heal? Oathless Sword finally realized why Mage had arranged for this lady, whom they were all unfamiliar with, to escort Todd. It was most likely in preparation for such a scenario. As for Svelte Dancer, she had always been following in stealth right beside them, as only this indomitable lady had the ability to keep up with everyone's normal movement speed while maintaining stealth. After Deepwaters fired an arrow out of spite at Oathless Sword, the next shot he had was aimed towards Gufei, yet he saw that Gufei was already prepared for this. Thinking back to how that man had easily swatted away that whole cluster of arrows everybody had sent his way, how were his shots going to end up any differently? Seeing the scene before him, as well as Vast Lushness's involuntary yell from before, he immediately made a decision about who should be the recipient of his second arrow. He once more targeted Oathless Sword and fired away. There were only 4 opponents they were up against right now. With the skill Gufei had displayed, Deepwaters was not at all confident he could land a shot on the man. Svelte Dancer was nimble, so it would not be easy for him to shoot her. Given how robust her defense was because of her equipment, it was unlikely he would make a dent in her even if he did connect with his attack. Finally, there was Vast Lushness, who could easily duck back behind Todd and therefore take up an angle in where he could not attack her. Despite how overly aggressive Oathless Sword acted, he was actually the easiest target out of the 4 and also happened to be the leader of this quest. Killing him might create some sort of unexpected result. Each and every point that piled up in his analysis made Oathless Sword the undisputed choice for this second shot from Deepwaters. After taking an arrow to the head like that, Oathless Sword felt an arrow drive into his chest and the next moment. Seeing that Deepwaters was really looking to kill him, he abruptly felt extremely regretful that he had arrogantly called attention to himself. Fortunately, he was the leader of a large guild, someone ranked on the warrior leaderboard. He was considered to be one of the top players of his job class, so while Deepwaters was one of the 5 unyielding experts, he had chosen to advance into Hunter, which meant the arrows he shot were not the strongest. Oathless Sword was more than capable of withstanding 2 arrows like that. He turned to look at the other 3. Svelte Dancer and Gufei were focused on disposing of those other hunters, so neither had turned to look in his direction. Vast Lushness was close by, but was currently staring at him. If he was looking for the best way to describe the look she had at the moment, the only phrase that came to mind was cold regard. Vast Lushness was truly a woman of her word. She meant it when she claimed she did not have the time for him. She was not showing even the slightest hint of bestowing a heel onto Oathless Sword at all. At this crucial moment, all he could depend on was himself. Because Oathless Sword had been playing with a man hooked by the skyhook, he had managed to clear out a path free of traps from all the dragging he did, and he naturally did not just stand there to take all the shots Deepwaters sent his way. He instantly stepped onto the safe path he had created with his own hands. Unfortunately, with how slow his movement speed was, Deepwaters was able to deal with this attempt at escape, and continued feeding him an even stream of arrows without missing a beat. Oathless Sword was now flustered like his head was on fire, and what made things worse was the fact that ever since he started moving, Todd had begun to follow him and move as well. In truth, every time Todd was taken out from the prison, they had always assigned him to someone in traversing 4 seas to follow. Todd had always been assigned to follow Oathless Sword, but although this NPC was assigned to follow, the reality of the matter had everybody following him instead. While Todd was following Oathless Sword, he did so at his own pace. Disregarding how fast the movement speed of the assigned player was, he moved according to his own pace. Almost everyone proceeded to match their movement speed to the pace that Todd had set. They had not tried to find out what would happen if everybody abandoned him, but that was mainly because they did not dare to test it out. Now that Oathless Sword was moving again, Todd immediately followed him at one side and walked after him obediently. The sound of a metallic trap going off sounded in the next moment, and it seemed there was nothing special about Todd aside from the immense amount of HP he had. After it had been ensnared by triggering a trap, he dumbly stood there without taking another step. Oathless Sword did not bother to put too much thought into it, however, as he was solely focused on avoiding the arrows still coming after him, dashing straight ahead. Actually, it was not too much of an issue for Todd to be trapped in place like this. The issue is that the one step he took instantly exposed Vast Lushness to Deepwater's arrows. Being an experienced combatant, Deepwaters had already identified the glow from Vast Lushness's staff as the exact same that wreathed Gufay, and deduced that there must have been some sort of cooperation involved with the two. But Vast Lushness had plenty of combat experience on her shoulders and had been hiding behind Todd all this while, not giving him any chance to interrupt her. Since his men currently had their hands full trying to get away from both Gufay and Svelte Dancer, they could not really spare the effort to notice such fine details. But now that Oathless Sword had suddenly moved, Todd followed along with him, which indirectly exposed Vast Lushness. This had all happened in a brief moment, yet Deepwaters had already grasped onto the chance and immediately fired off an arrow at Vast Lushness. Vast Lushness was unable to defend against this arrow in time, and her skill was interrupted. As Mana Sacrifice was a skill provided by her magic staff, the cooldown duration it had was extremely long. This interrupt probably meant there was good chance the battle would finish by the time she could use her skill again. Vast Lushness hurriedly cast a heal on herself before realizing how Oathless Sword had messed up the entire status quo. She was irate, but looking at the bigger picture, she ruthlessly brandished her staff as if she were slamming it into someone as her heel brushed over Oathless Sword. "Why did you move?" Oathless Sword had also realized that he had ruined the situation they were in, but should he have waited for death instead? Thus, he helplessly moaned, "What else could I do?" Vast Lushness knew how helpless he was in the situation before, so she had no idea what to reply, either. Topping up Oathless Sword's HP with her heel, the two now worriedly gazed over at Gufay. When Gufay had mana, every move he made insta-killed the hunters. Now that he was out of mana, he was still as imposing as ever. He had already swapped the moonlit nightfalls in his right hand to his sacred flames of baptism, and every slash he dealt would occasionally course with fire or electricity, no different from how he looked before. Naturally, the damage from a fire attack and a twin incineration were worlds apart, but the lot of hunters were still fleeing ignominiously in the face of his attacks. Oathless Sword and Vast Lushness looked at one another, and felt that their worry for Gufay had been for naught. Did it even matter to this unique mage if he had mana or not, given the level of expertise he possessed? The one who was suffering the most was, of course, Deepwaters. He had been in high spirits when he interrupted Vast Lushness casting, thinking that it would have such a strong impact that it might turn the tide of the battle. But in the end he discovered that the bunch of hunters he had brought along were still struggling in an ugly way, losing their lives one by one as Gufay and Svelte Dancer hunted them down with impunity. Deepwaters. Standing beside Deepwaters all this while, Coco softly called out to him. This couple had played 6 different MMOs together, and had lost count how many battles they had fought side by side. Coco's skill, experience, and insight might not be as plentiful as Deepwaters, but was nevertheless still substantial. She could already tell that the quest they had picked up this time was truly difficult to accomplish. It was entirely because their opponent was simply far too indomitable.